Welcome to Flight Review. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. Can you believe it's been like a couple of months since I've done a review episode? The last review that I did was Deadpool and Wolverine. Why is that? Well, just a lot of real life shit's been going down, truthfully. And I'll be honest with you, in addition to like stuff going on in real life, there just hasn't been a ton of juice for me. Like Beetlejuice is probably the last one that I wanted to do a review for, and then some real life stuff got in the way with respect to being able to schedule that. But like a few of you were talking to me, I know Scott and a few others were asking about like whether I had seen Joker Folie à Deux and where that review was, and I still haven't seen it to this point. It's probably going to be not until streaming or digital until I see that, because I just didn't have the enough juice for that one, to be honest with you. And frankly, I feel like with respect to Joker Folie à Deux, we've all discussed that. People are talking about that movie way too much. It's not an important movie. It's not this massively important deal for DC Studios. It's not even a DC Studios movie. We have spent way too much time talking about it at all. And at some point, I'll probably review it and probably post it at patreon.com/theflightcast for a flight review episode for the patrons. But yeah, I had more juice for this. I had more juice for the movie that I'm talking about today, which is Venom: The Last Dance. Yes, I had way more juice for this particular movie. But funny enough, I've been out of the loop. It snuck up on me. I didn't realize, oh wait, that's coming out this week? All right, well, definitely had to put some time away, to take some time out to see that opening weekend. So yeah, I'm going to get into my, high-level thoughts and all my normal, regular review breakdown for this. We're going to talk a little bit about box office, and then I'm also going to take some time to talk about why a lot of the fandom doesn't like this movie. Because there's two specific reasons, I think, that they don't like this movie, and it's, a broken record. It's same shit, different day with respect to why. Because this is yet another case where the fans and the general audience don't agree. We'll get into that here in a little bit. I also do want to talk about the one thing about this movie that majorly pissed me off. And I'm going to talk about it, it'll be towards the end of my other thoughts with respect to it. It's one major thing that Sony decided to do, the powers that be, that just, absolutely 1000% infuriates me, and I guarantee you don't know what it is. I guarantee. Anybody out there, if this one thing that pissed me off royally about the movie, if it's the one thing that pisses you off too, or if it was part of your list of things that piss you off, I will be stunned. I'll be absolutely shocked, because this is not something that I've talked about with respect to movie reviews before, but I will get into that here in a little bit. Of course, I want to remind everybody listening to this, thank you so much again for listening to this show. Thank you so much for following and supporting theflightcast.com. When I do get, a chance to post episodes, and I am still working on getting to a more consistent schedule, if you will, especially with a show like this. But all my episodes of this and the Flightcast and Flight Chat, the feedback show that we do here periodically when we get emails, is all can be found at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts, whether it is on YouTube, because these podcasts are on YouTube now at the Flightcast YouTube channel. You can also listen to it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Overcast, if you want to use that app, wherever you get your podcatchers, whatever podcatching app you use, you can totally find the Flightcast at. Also, thank you, as always, to all of the very loyal supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast. Definitely need to get more consistent. I've been saying this for months. Getting more consistent with respect to content on that. Hopefully, within the next week or so, some more stressors in real life are going to go away, potentially. We'll see how that goes with respect to my job and things going on in the real world, if you will. And then we'll see about getting reorganized and getting into some real reviews and breaking out some new stuff here. But thank you so much for those of you still supporting me at patreon.com/theflightcast. Really appreciate it. Alright, so there's really no need to beat around the bush about this. If you've listened to my reviews or my shows before, any of my previous reviews about the Venom movies, you know that I enjoy this part of the franchise. You know that I enjoy largely the Sony universe of Marvel characters, or whatever the hell they've decided to call it. So high-level thoughts, yes, of course, I enjoyed Venom: The Last Dance. I did. Most certainly I did. But, this is where having a wide strike zone really helps. Really, really helps, to be honest with you. And come on, I'm the guy that owns a Steelbook 4K copy of Madam Web. Yes, I do. I reviewed it positively for this show. I own it. I'm staring at it right now on my shelf right next to me, right? at some point, I will own a 4K Steelbook copy of Morbius. I just haven't found it off of eBay yet, but I will. I will most certainly own that. And I have both of the previous two Venom movies. I have the first one, which I thoroughly enjoyed. That was just a very refreshing take on superhero movies back in, 2019? I think it was the year before the pandemic, when 2019, one of those 2 years that it came out, to be honest with you. I can't even remember. It's been a couple of years, obviously. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. Truthfully, had a lot of fun with it. I've rewatched it a number of times and have enjoyed a lot of great moments out of it. And I also liked Venom, Let There Be Carnage. I did, for, all the stuff that movie did, right? And to me, if I'm ranking Venom The Last Dance within this trilogy, I would probably put it ahead of Venom, Let There Be Carnage, truthfully. As far as a movie that I enjoy on a particular level compared to the others, yeah, at this point, I would probably rank the trilogy first one best, the third one, Venom The Last Dance, like second best, and then Let There Be Carnage, at the bottom of the list. But I do enjoy all three of these movies, and I'll own Venom The Last Dance. It's already available for pre-order in a couple of different areas, that Steelbook, and those are starting to get more expensive because the corporate powers that be are starting to really rake us over the coals with respect to that, as far as us physical media collectors are concerned. But that's a whole other discussion. Now, I enjoy these movies because I know what they are, and I appreciate how different they are, and how they've set the tone, right? They set the tone for what they were going to do with this franchise very early, and I appreciate that it's not like the MCU. I appreciate that it's not like anything we've seen with DC. I appreciate that it's different. I appreciate that it goes in its own direction, and I appreciate that it's telling its own story. It is true Elseworlds. It is arguably, one of the most definitive, examples of an Elseworlds trilogy that we have seen, right? This is nothing like anything that you would expect with respect to, any type of comic accuracy or, storylines. I mean, obviously they're using characters and names that, plenty of you fans will understand, and you probably did the whole Leo DiCaprio thing, picking out the references for those of you that did see this movie. But I never had the high expectations for what this trilogy was going to be. I watched the first movie. I enjoyed how refreshing it was, refreshingly different it was from everything else that we'd seen at the time. And I understood exactly where they were going. And so Let There Be Carnage didn't surprise me, and this didn't surprise me. It's just fun. It's an id trilogy. Seriously, I talk about id movies all the time. Cheeseburger movies is another term that I use for them, right? Not everything can be cinema. Not everything can be the high art. And it shouldn't be. It doesn't have to be. Not every movie has to be like a Federico Fellini or a Martin Scorsese masterpiece that's Oscar nominated. No, sometimes you just want to sit down, turn the flippin' brain off, and have some fun for 2 hours. And that's what the Venom trilogy is. And that's what Venom The Last Dance absolutely continues to be. But in addition to the fun that we do have with this film, there are also some very heartfelt moments, and that's the one thing that I can absolutely say about this trilogy, is that it's always had heart. At the core, it's always had heart, and there's always been some emotional storytelling with respect to character development throughout this, regardless of how you feel about it. And again, I'll get into that here in a little bit here. But yeah, high level thoughts. I enjoyed it. I don't have any bad things like, oh my goodness, kill it with fire. No, I absolutely don't feel that way. And for all of the boo birds in the fandom that are, once again assigning this worst comic book movie ever, you're children. You're absolutely children, because that means you have not seen, yet again, you've not seen a comic book movie before the year 2000. Go back to the 90s, go back to the 80s and 70s and watch some of those comic book movies, and then tell me that anything made in the shared cinematic universe era is the worst comic book movie ever made. No, I will never agree with that. And it's all subjective. You can disagree with me all you like, but under no circumstances. But I enjoyed it. I most certainly enjoyed this film. And obviously, when it comes to this movie, just like with the previous two Venom movies, when you talk about the cast, it begins and ends with Tom Hardy. Seriously, the best thing that Sony did was hire Tom Hardy to do this, because he carries this entire franchise. Without him, without his energy, without his presence, without his heart throughout all three of these movies, it doesn't work. It's not as successful. It doesn't, carry itself as well, right? It begins and ends with him, and not just in terms of how he plays Eddie Brock, but also in terms of how he voices Venom, right? Because he's both voices, and the ability that he has to play against himself in such an organic manner is just a testament to how badass of an actor he is. Seriously, and that was absolutely the MVP, the number one, the best possible thing that this franchise could have done was bring him in, and he continues. He absolutely continues to be funny at times, be heartfelt at times, be emotional at times, be relatable at times, right? And this is a whole different, like, we've seen 2 live action incarnations of Eddie Brock, right? Between the 3 movies in this trilogy with Tom Hardy, and then of course Topher Grace's turn in Spider-Man 3. And I don't think anybody's necessarily arguing that Topher Grace's is better, although I'm sure there are some comic purists that would talk about how that one is more comic accurate, especially since he was in a Spider-Man film. But either way, if we're talking about just acting performances, I mean, come on, there's no question. And seriously, like, some of the more emotional, like, heartfelt moments in this movie definitely come from him and come from what he does and what he's able to do acting against himself as Venom. That's like the biggest dynamic that is most enjoyable about this film and about all this whole trilogy is the relationship between Eddie and Venom. And Hardy is outstanding, absolutely outstanding. I really have never had a single complaint with respect to how he's played it and the energy that he has brought playing against himself for the whole We Are Venom situation. I thoroughly enjoyed that. But the rest of this cast, this isn't a bad cast. I don't want to say that it's like the strongest cast in the world, right? I mean, Chiwetel Ejiofor, who's starting to become a bit of a Marvel legacy actor, if you will, right? Because he's been in, Doctor Strange, 2 Doctor Strange movies, as 2 different versions of Baron Mordo, but now he's in this, he's playing kind of like a, one of the more stereotypical characters that we've seen him play in other movies like The Old Guard and some of the other streaming stuff that he's done, where he's kind of the hard-ass military man, right? And it's an archetype we've seen so many times. He pulls it off, though, as best as he can, as far as it. Again, if you're not going to have, like, necessarily the strongest script, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit, like, you do want to get some strong supporting players in order to fill those roles out and at least give you, like, the strongest performance that you can get out of players who know how to play that type of role. But I didn't have any complaints with him. He's, static general that is, out to capture the symbiotes and Venom in this regard. And, he's not necessarily a villain, but he is certainly an antagonist for a decent portion of the film. And by the way, I forgot, spoiler warning, I will go ahead and, this is your obligatory spoiler warning with respect to, any, like, spoilers and whatnot, because there are some things, some implications, and some emotional stuff that I do want to talk about. Juno Temple, her character, Dr. Teddy Payne, I haven't seen it. The funny part was, like, I saw her, like, when she popped up in the movie, and I'm like, I know her. I can't remember I could not remember what her name was for the life of me. I don't think I've seen any movies. Oh, no. Well, okay. Technically, she was in, who was she in The Dark Knight Rises? She played a character named Jen in The Dark Knight Rises. I don't even remember that character. Okay. All right. Guess she's in there. She's also in Sin City, A Dame to Kill For, as far as, like, other comic book films. But other than that, I've seen nothing else. I have not seen A Dame to Kill For. I actually haven't seen that. But I know the name. I knew who she was. Wait, I remember who she is. I totally remember who she is in The Dark Knight Rises. She was Selina's friend. That's right. The one that was, like, kind of homeless or, like, squatting. That's right. I remember that. Okay. She wasn't in the movie for that long, but I totally remember her. Anyway, her character, standard scientist that wants to explore the symbiote relationship and, treats them like, they're actual creatures that, deserve some form of rights, while the military just wants to, capture them and, eradicate them, if you will, right? So she's going to be one of the human doctors that advocates for the aliens. Yes, another archetype that we are so used to seeing, for sure. No doubt about that. Outside of that, I wasn't necessarily expecting to see Stephen Graham again, and not that he did a ton. He was really just kind of a vehicle, like a plot device for, the symbiote that was attached to him to do some expositional explaining of what was going on with Null. I did not even know that Null, the character who was the symbiote god in this film, was played by Andy Serkis. I've seen people make the Thanos comparisons. And yes, I totally get that. I mean, the way that they shot it, the way that it sounded, the vibes, yes, I totally get it. It does seem like Sony was borrowing heavily from the playbook in terms of how the MCU set up Thanos. Yes, most certainly it does. Even of course getting into the mid-credit scene as well. But they were fine. I mean, obviously Andy Serkis and Stephen Graham have both done way more in other films, so it was like, all right, they're there. It's not really a big thing, but they're not bad, right? They're not awful. I don't want to make it seem like, oh, this was such an amazing film. No, it's not a perfect film. Yes, it has its flaws, but I enjoyed it for what it was, and I just didn't go into it with all these massive expectations like, oh, it needs to be this, it needs to be that. No, it was just being fine. If a comic book movie is just fine, I'm perfectly okay with that. I have no issues with a comic book movie being just fine, or with characters and actors in it being just fine. Stephen Graham and Andy Serkis were just fine. Chiwetel Ejiofor was just fine. Juno Temple was just fine, truthfully. Rhys Ifans, on the other hand, I will give him a little bit of a notch above, right? And it's funny because when I look at his character and when I look at funny enough, I went through the whole movie and didn't think until much later, oh yeah, he's Connors. That's right. He's the Lizard. And not only, he's one of the actors that, like, he was the Lizard in Amazing Spider-Man, and he also crossed over into the MCU in Spider-Man No Way Home. So he's been in he's been in a Sony Spider-Man movie, he's been in an MCU Spider-Man movie, and now playing a completely different character, he has been in a Venom film, right? He's turning into one of those Marvel character actors as well, who does not care about, what studio it is, Sony, Marvel Studios, whatever. But, it's funny because, his character and the family, I will not lie to you that initially I got Russian family vibes from Justice League. I did. But this is a better family. This is a much better family. You know why? Because this family actually had a point. There was actually a point to why they existed. And maybe you don't agree with that. Maybe you think they were useless. Maybe you think that they were throwaway. But no, at first I got Russian family Justice League vibes from them, and then as the movie went on, I was like, especially that middle part where Eddie and Venom are riding with them in the van, the VW van. I'm like, okay, no, I get it. I get what they're supposed to represent. And I'll talk about this a little bit with respect to the writing. But Rhys Ifans, he was good. He was himself, right? First thing I ever saw him in was The Replacements, and he was cool in that movie. He was obviously cool as Kirk Connors in, like I said, Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man No Way Home. I don't have any issues with him. He's a cool, Welsh actor, and he played the part well. I thought he had some good energy and some, good chemistry with respect. And he's one of the characters that brings more of the heart into this film for sure. So yeah, I didn't have any issues with respect to him at all. I would put him, I'd say he was just above, he's not quite on Hardy's level as far as how he's playing the character Martin Moon in this movie, but he's the closest one out of everybody else to get to that point. The one that kind of threw me off a little bit was Clark Backo, who plays Sadie Christmas. I feel like this is a character, and this happens with Sony movies. I feel like there was probably a lot more of her character that was filmed that got cut out of the final edit, more than likely, because there's just a lot of moments where we see her emoting and we see her emotions on camera, and a lot of blocking with her. And it's I was always questioning what her deal was. And, was it really only just that she sympathized with the symbiotes along with Teddy Payne, Dr. Teddy Payne, or was there something else going on? I always felt like there was something else going on, and they changed it later. I don't know if we'll hear about that later on, but it felt like her character was just a little incomplete. I didn't mind her. She was another just fine. I just felt like there was some development with her that was missing, that was probably cut out of the final edit, if I had to venture a guess. But again, she was just fine. And there's nobody really in this cast that I was just like, ugh. Oh, no good. No, didn't need them. They could move. Nobody rubbed me the wrong way with respect to this cast. And again, it all comes down to, begins and ends with Tom Hardy. He's badass as Eddie Brock in Venom, and that's really all this cast truthfully needs, to be honest with you. And honestly, whatever movie studio you are, if you're going to have a script that isn't quite, the Batman level or a hired Spider-Man movie level or whatever, right? If I look at this and it's this screenplay was written by the director Kelly Marcel, and the story was co-written by Tom Hardy and Kelly Marcel. This isn't necessarily there isn't a ton to this script. There isn't a ton to this story, right? It's not a bad story. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh, wow, what a horrible script. No, it's not a bad story at all. Again, it fits the tenor of this franchise. It fits the tenor of this trilogy, without a doubt. I can't tell you that Venom: The Last Dance sticks out like a sore thumb with respect to the other two movies. It does not. It fits perfectly in to the other three movies. I like how it starts with respect to reminding us that for a brief moment, Eddie and Venom were in the MCU. They were talking about Thanos to that bartender, and then they got thrown back into their own universe, which we did see in No Way Home, in one of the credit sequences of No Way Home. So he's back in his own universe. It's like, okay, so we're not going quite the Deadpool Wolverine route, but a little bit, right? Just for a second here at the beginning. But he gets back into his own world, and this idea that he's been framed for the murder of Mulligan, Stephen Graham's character, right? So he's on the run, and of course the army's chasing after the symbiotes anyway. But in the midst of this, Null, the symbiote god, is also sending these xenophages across the galaxy to find this codex, right? That's going to release him from the prison that the symbiotes have caged him in, this void, if you will, right? And I'm sure there's a ton of comic lore, and I'm sure those of you that are deeply, devoutly into the comic lore, maybe Stu, maybe Anthony, whoever it is, that's deep, Phil, whoever, any of you that are steeped in the Venom comic lore, I'm sure you're looking at it going, well, this is wrong, and this is off, and that's off, and this is loosely adapted, and this is here. Yeah, I get that. I haven't read it, so I don't have that type of approach to it. So I went through the movie going, okay, I'm sure that someone knows who these characters are. This is my first introduction to them. It is what it is, whatever. How do they fit into this story? Well, it's simple, okay? So they need the codex. Venom, of course, is the symbiote that has the codex. So now these xenophages are hunting them down, and apparently when he is joined with Eddie, it just puts a nice big target on their back because the xenophages can see the codex when the bonding is occurring. And it's all right, well, it's a heat seeker, if you will. Okay. And that's basically the plot of it is okay, we've got to deal with these xenophages that are trying to take us and the other symbiotes out, but at the same time the military is trying to capture us, and they've got all the other symbiotes captured as well. So it's kind of a three groups here, right? Eddie and Venom, traversing and doing their thing. The army, the military, Chiwetel Ejiofor's character and Juno Temple's character, the doctor, hunting after them, for experimentation and capture purposes, right? And then Null sending the xenophages to go, capture them and get this codex so that he can be released. That type of thing. All right, fine. I mean, it's basic. It is what it is. There's not a whole lot to it. The exposition, there are definitely some, weightier expositional scenes, and there are some flashback moments with Juno Temple's character, Teddy, that, with her stuff with her brother and this lightning power, and it's okay, was there a symbiote connection there? I don't know. I mean, again, one of the issues with Sony Marvel movies is it does feel like they cut a lot of stuff out, right? Not necessarily, you don't feel it with the Spider-Man movies so much, but definitely with with this movie, with Morbius for sure. We all know the stuff that got cut out of that, and Madam Web as well, right? They just, there's a lot of stuff that seems to hit the cutting room floor before it goes to final, and I don't know who is in charge of doing that. I don't know if it's Avi Arad or whoever it is. Who are the other producers on this film, right? Avi Arad, Matt Tolmach, Amy Pascal, along with Kelly Marcel, Tom Hardy, and Hutch Parker. I don't know who it is. Maybe it is Avi Arad, Matt Tolmach, and Amy Pascal that are making all these final decisions. I guess I don't agree with all of them, but they like to tighten up these movies. This movie's 109 minutes long, and I do think that's close to okay, but a little short for something like this. But it is what it is. That's just how Sony has decided to do it in that regard. But it does feel like things are missing a lot of times. I wasn't 100% sold on I felt like we were missing parts of Teddy's development. I feel like we were missing parts of Sadie Christmas's development for sure. And some of the expositional scenes were a little weighty here and there. I don't think this film had a pacing issue truthfully, I know that some people probably felt that the stuff with the family in the middle was slow. Here's why I didn't think that was slow. I didn't think that was slow because that's where a lot of the heart in the movie comes out. In fact, there's a line in the movie when they're all singing, that crazy folksy version, the family version of Space Odyssey. Or Space Oddity, pardon me, by David Bowie, which is like one of my favorite Bowie tunes, right? And they're singing it in like, Sonny and Cher's show tune form, basically, right? And Eddie's just like, oh, just kill me. I don't want to be here for this, right? But there is that one moment where Venom tells him that, like, I'm paraphrasing, but something to the effect of, in some cases, we could have had a life like that. Because they're reflecting on how chaotic things have been for them since they came together a year ago, right? It's crazy that only a year's worth of time has passed between these three movies, right? Between this trilogy. But it's just one of those moments where they're kind of reflecting on how together this family is and like how warm this family is. And that's not a life that either of them have. It's not a life that either of them were privy to, right? They missed out on that. And there's a moment where the both of them kind of lament that, or like, hey, we could have had a happy life, because they both see themselves as losers and they both see themselves as people that maybe don't necessarily deserve a life like that, but they would have liked to have had one in that regard, instead of always being on the run, instead of always being, the lethal protector life, if you will, that type of thing. So, and that's why I think the family has more weight here in this movie, because it is a emotional representation of the life that Eddie and Venom can't have. Right, the life that they were denied, right, the peace, and the warmth, if you will, right. They are two peas in a pod, but they're definitely at odds, and they definitely like have their struggles, and life is much more difficult for them than it is for even this family, right. And this is a family that believes in UFOs. At least the parents totally believe in UFOs. They're driving to Area 51, which, yes, okay, ring the bell on that one. Area 51, which is being decommissioned, but underneath is Area 55, where they're keeping all the symbiotes. Okay, yes, all that, whatever. Yes, there is some tropey stuff with respect to that in here. But, again, this is where I feel like, the heart with respect to, what Hardy does with Eddie and Venom has already been there this whole trilogy. And then I think, the family does add to it in that regard because of scenes like that in the middle. And so that's why I didn't have an issue with the pacing with respect to that, because I felt like that was important for the emotional arc of this. And also definitely, when it gets heavier towards the end, because again, and I'll talk about this a little bit, the general audience is in stark disagreement yet again with the fans, if you will, I think by and large, with respect to this film. And this happened with the first film. The first film, critics and fans hated it, gave it a rotten rating, but it made over $800 million, right? And then, I forget what the disparity was for Let There Be Carnage, but I know that the audience score for this film, Venom: The Last Dance, is much higher than the critics score, and definitely, I've seen some reactions on social media from people who really liked this movie and got really emotional at the end of it. Shonda saw it earlier today. She said it was really sad, like how it ended, and it is a heartbreaking ending, as far as like Venom's self-sacrifice, and the symbiotes fighting the xenophages and trying to save all of the humans, at Area 51. Like there is a lot of emotional stuff there, and I like the whole thing about how Eddie and Venom were trying to get to New York. Like they felt like New York was going to be their way out because he knew a judge there, and I'm sure that's an Easter egg that I don't know about. But he supposedly knew a judge there that he had some dirt on that was going to help them, and so that was the whole idea. They didn't get there until after Venom died, right? Until after he sacrificed himself with the acid and all that. And yeah, that was I'm not going to lie, that was definitely an emotional moment, and it just, again, speaks to the heart that Tom Hardy brings to this character and how he plays both of them, when Venom tells him goodbye, and then just kind of the emptiness that he has as Eddie, at the end of the film, because he lost his friend. He lost his best friend. He lost his buddy that he'd been through a lot of shit with, truthfully, in the last year, right? And it's just, he ends up in New York, which I think is cool. And of course, that leads into some open-ended stuff towards the end where it's like, oh, well, now Eddie Brock is in New York. Oh, who could he possibly run into, depending on how things go with this, right? We'll see, right? I mean, obviously he's there. He's within close proximity. Maybe he'll start working at the Daily Bugle. Who knows? We'll find that out going forward, right? With whatever plans Sony has for any of this, to be honest with you. But I don't think this is a bad story. I just think it's a meh story, right? It is what it is, and I know some people are like, well, meh is worse than bad. Hey, listen, it's all subjective. That's your feelings on it, but I didn't see anything in this story that was just like, oh, that's awful. Oh, that's terrible. No, I didn't feel that way at all. It was basic. It had some expositional dumps here and there, but nothing that I was just like, oh, so completely off put by. It is what it is, to be honest with you. I'm not going to knock it for that. I really am not. But I'll tell you what, a big part of the reason that I'm not going to knock this movie for, some story issues that are a little bit clunky here and there is because I think visually this movie's gorgeous. Seriously, I thought that from the beginning. Like, there are some shots and there's some things in this movie that I'm like, okay, no, this is really, really good, right? Production design and location shooting aside, Kelly Marcel, this is her directorial debut. Kelly Marcel is a English screenwriter, film director, and former actress. And I don't know, like, what else has she been in anything that I've seen? Well, apparently she was in, she's been involved with 50 Shades of Grey, Saving Mr. Banks. She wrote Saving Mr. Banks? And she wrote 50 Shades of Grey. Okay, I didn't know that. Apparently she has some uncredited script work for Mad Max Fury Road. She's an executive producer on the first Venom movie. She wrote the story for Cruella, and she wrote Venom Let There Be Carnage and Venom The Last Dance. Okay, so this was her directorial debut. And to me, I felt like there were some things she did visually in this film, with respect to different shots and camera work that I thought was really, the underwater sequence, there's an underwater chase sequence. I thought that was really good. I thought that was done extremely well. The underwater sequence with the military and Eddie and Venom, and also with when the Xenophage shows up, I thought that was really well done. I thought all of the symbiote visual effects were really good, truthfully. I like how the symbiotes look in this film. There wasn't anything in this movie, visually speaking, with the symbiotes that I thought looked terrible. There wasn't any, bad, cheap graphics or PS2, looking rubbery type stuff. It all looked really good. All of it, whether it was how Venom looked, whether it was how the other symbiotes looked, I thought it was all of that looked gorgeous. Seriously. I think this movie is very well shot, and I think it's very well visually composed. This is a great time to bring up Fabian Wagner. He is the DP for this particular film, and that is a name that I'm sure a number of you are aware of, because what other film was he the director of photography from that we would know, that many of us would know? That's right, Fabian Wagner, the director of photography for Zack Snyder's Justice League. So there you have it. That's why this movie looks as good as it does. This movie really, visual style, I really commend it. I really do like it. I really enjoyed a great deal of it in terms of how it was shot, in terms of lighting, in terms of visual effects choices. And there were a ton of visual effects houses, ILM, Digital Domain, among others that worked on this. It's a long list, a very, very long list of credits for the VFX artists that worked on this. I thought the Xenophage stuff was really well done and creepy. The whole when it eats people and the blood squirts out of its back, it's or sprays rather. It's like a meat grinder, and it was just really off-putting and unsettling. I'm like, please kill this thing. Please kill this thing. However you can. It just seemed like they couldn't kill it the whole time. It was a very difficult battle that they had with everything. But no, a lot of the story issues and a lot of the other issues that I may have, a lot of the clunkier stuff that I might say this movie has, is really picked up by the visuals. I think this film visually looks really good for $120 million. I really don't have many complaints at all, right? And maybe I'll pick some stuff out on a second and third viewing, but just off of the first viewing that I have, no, I like the way this movie's shot. I like the way this movie's composed, and I like the visual effects. I think visually speaking, this is one of Sony's stronger efforts, outside of the Spider-Man films that they've done. I 100% believe that. And not that I thought that the previous two Venom movies were weak either. I think the Venom and the symbiote effects throughout this entire trilogy have been really good, truthfully. I've liked all of them, but I think they've gotten better. I think they have improved. And I think that arguably Venom The Last Dance might be the best that all of this has looked, visually speaking, to be honest with you. And then, of course, when it comes to the music, I don't have really any complaints about the music. This is not a bombastic, theme-filled score, from a new name that I've never heard of, Dane Deacon. He's an American composer and electronic musician. based in Baltimore, Maryland. I guess he does live shows with large-scale audience participation, and interaction is often a major element of the performance. I'm reading that straight from the wiki. I've never heard of him, but I definitely got the experimental electronics in this score, and I could hear it at different times, especially in some of the more expositional scenes and some of the more decompression moments. And I like electronic music, so I didn't have any complaints. I really did not have any complaints with the score. It wasn't necessarily one that, like, you know, oh my goodness, what an amazing score. Like, did it blow me away or like stick in my head necessarily, like, you know, Ludwig Göransson in either Black Panther movies or the Mandalorian? No, but it's a different type of composition. You know, this is experimental, like, you know, atmospheric music that complements what we're seeing on screen without dominating a scene, without, like, you know, matching the action. I mean, it matches, but it's there to help support the story, right? You when we hear compositions for superhero and comic book films, right? A lot of times, like, you can go one way or the other. You can do the score that, like, matches the action on screen, you know, like perfectly, you know, beat for beat, and like actually, you know, is cut to what happens on screen that you're watching. And then you've got stuff that's just, you know, very atmospheric, very there, and, you know, just serves to flesh out the world and give it a different tone and a different feel for whatever the storyline is and for whatever is going. And I can't tell you that this doesn't match what we see on screen. It does. In my opinion, it most certainly does, right? And it fits into, you know, any of what we've heard, you know, with respect to this particular franchise. Ludwig did do the score. Ludwig Göransson, I mentioned a minute ago. He did do the score for the first Venom film. Who did the score for the second one? Let There Be Carnage. Marco Beltrami, that's right, yes. So, you know, 3 different composers and definitely 3 different styles, but I think they all fit what this trilogy wanted, and they all fit the tone and tenor that the Venom trilogy definitely espouses to in this regard. So yeah, I don't have any complaints with respect to Dan Deacon's experimental music score here. I thought it fit very well, and there were definitely some pieces of it that I certainly liked and did stand out to me, and I'll definitely probably pick them out, either listening to this score by itself, which is available like on Apple Music and Spotify and everything, or, you know, the next time that I see the movie, to be honest with you. So yeah, everybody, overall, I liked it. I liked Venom: The Last Dance. I thought it was a satisfying conclusion to this particular trilogy. I love the fact that Venom has a trilogy at this point, right? You know, and this is the part where I can talk about box office and also talk about the 2 things that, you know, the 2 big things that I think are reasons why fans just, you know, want to kill this movie with fire, or at the very least just dislike it. You know, this is one of those cases where, you know, we've talked about fan expectations, right? We've talked about, you know, there's 2 sets of expectations going on here. There's expectations for what a comic book movie should do, and then there's also expectations for how it should be adapted from the source material. And I think that those are the 2 biggest hang-ups that are really sticking in the craw of a lot of fans that just don't like this film and don't like this trilogy. They had all these expectations for what they wanted to see for Venom's first live-action performance, or appearance, if you will, and these 3 movies don't satisfy them, because they're thinking Todd McFarlane, you know, they're thinking Spider-Man, they're thinking all the story stuff that we saw in Spider-Man 3, they're thinking everything, you know, all of that, and then all that kind of Lethal Protector stuff. They wanted storylines adapted, right? That we go through this all the time with popular characters adapted for the big screen. And if you go into these movies expecting comic book adaptation, it's the same thing. Wonder Meg said this a number of years ago, and I will reiterate this because it still applies today. If you want comic accuracy, read a comic. Read the comic, seriously. And don't give me any of these bullshit arguments about how, well, no, there's a core to this character that is supposed to be... Screw all that, okay? This is an adaptation. It's an Elseworlds adaptation. And I will continue to say this till I'm blue in the face. You don't have to like it. You don't have to appreciate it whatsoever. You can dislike it. You can say, well, it's not quite my tempo because I wanted something that was more comic accurate. You're perfectly fine in saying that. But under no circumstances is this a wrong way to adapt Venom. This is the way that Sony chose. And this is a way that, quite frankly, the general audience has appreciated. And this is where I will get into the box office of the situation, because Venom, you know, it's funny. I Google Venom box office, just looking in the news stories in Google, right? And I see 2 headlines. 8 hours ago, as of the time of me recording this, I see a Variety headline that says, Venom 3 slinks to 51 million, lowest opening weekend of comic book trilogy. Which, yes, is true, because the first one opened really high. And then the second one, Let There Be Carnage, came out in 2021 during, pandemic times, if you will. So naturally, this is going to be, potentially lowest opening weekend with respect to that, right? But the funny thing is, that's the headline from 8 hours ago, and then another one from like an hour later says, Venom The Last Dance climbs to 124 million at international box office, 175 million globally. And that's where we stand, right? Venom The Last Dance, $120 million production budget, 51 million domestic, 124 international, 175 million worldwide. That is official as a box office mojo as well. So it has now made back its production budget in its opening weekend, and that's the goal. That's what you want to do. That is success. Does it really matter that 71% of it came from overseas? No, because that's just par for the course with respect to these movies. We've talked about this before, about how it is few and far between how many of these comic book movies are 50-50 splits or even close to 50-50 splits. The first Black Panther film, Wonder Woman, the first Wonder Woman film, those are examples, right? But a lot of these, the vast majority, these comic book films, usually the international numbers are significantly higher than the domestic number, right? And 51 million is still enough for it to be number one at the box office. It's not like anything else beat it out, right? And maybe it'll be there in a second weekend. It is what it is. But again, if I go over to our Bane site, if you will, the Bane of fans' existence, right? I hate Rotten Tomatoes and I talk about it, but I only use it to illustrate a point with respect to whenever fans, just want to shit all over an adaptation like this. And I go in here, wow, look, there's now in theater, wow, they've revamped this stupid ass site. I don't know if I like the order of this. I didn't terribly like the order before, but yeah, here we go. 37% rotten, for over 127 reviews, 80% fresh. So this isn't being review bombed, okay? This isn't like, there's no like, get woke, go broke idiots that are like coming at it for whatever reason, right? And even the purists, this is just par for the course with this franchise. I mentioned before, the disparity between the audience score and the critics score with respect to the first Venom film. I think the first one, what was it, like 20%? Or what was it? It was like 26, 27%. Or 30. Okay, it's up to 30. The first Venom film, 30% rotten with the critics, 80% fresh on what they're now calling the popcorn meter. Okay, so they have the tomato meter and the popcorn meter. Oh, aren't they flippin' clever? Good for them, whatever. And then Venom, Let There Be Carnage, same thing. 57% rotten with the critics, 80% fresh on the popcorn meter. And Venom The Last Dance, 37% fresh with the tomato meter, 80% fresh popcorn meter. And the numbers bear this out, guys. Venom is not a failure of a franchise. You may not like it. You may not care for how it adapted the character, but the general audience, by and large, has enjoyed this franchise. They have. They most certainly have. They've enjoyed this franchise. They really liked the first movie and turned out for that one. Again, what was that? To the tune of 800 million. Here, I'm going to look that up again real quick, because I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And I remember, like really enjoying it myself, because it was very different from anything else we had seen. 856 million is what the first Venom film made. 856 million worldwide. And again, the splits were the same. 213.5 domestic, 642.5 international. That's 25 to 75, right? 25% domestic, 75% international. This is just what these films do, and it's certainly what this franchise has done, right? So there's nothing necessarily different here with this other than maybe a lower opening weekend, right? I didn't realize Let There Be Carnage made over 500 million worldwide. Wow, that's crazy. For being released in 2021, that's actually pretty good, to be honest with you, right? 213.5 domestic, 293.2 international. So that's closer, right? That's 42.1% to 57.9%, right? But still, can we call this a failure? No, I don't think we can call this a failure just yet. Let's see how it goes going forward. But the general audience has just always appreciated this Trilogy, these films, more than a lot of the fans have. They just have. And because it's different, right? And fans do not have the same expectations. They don't have the same compunctions about these characters that we do, that fans do in this regard, right? They don't go into it like, well, I wanted this comic story adapted. I wanted him to meet Peter Parker. I wanted this to happen. I wanted that to happen, right? And so many fans just hitch their wagon to that, and if it doesn't happen, then the movie's ruined. It's like, oh, this is terrible. It's not what I wanted. It's so entitled, and it's so arrogant for fans to feel that way. But you know what? It's all subjective. You can feel however you want with respect to that. But these are always going to be adaptations, and they're never going to be 100%. Sorry, I know you want every movie, and I'm not saying anybody listening to this in particular feels this way, but I know so many fans want Sin City and 300 to be the norm, but it's not. It most certainly is not. And it's just how it's always been, regardless of studio, right? Marvel has certainly played fast and loose with their comic adaptations, so is DC. It is what it is. The general audience is the target. 90 to 95%. Remember that. We are 5 to 10%, if we're lucky, of the total audience. 90 to 95% that these films are aimed at. General audience, they like the Venom films. They're happier because they don't have the same expectations in that regard. All right. Now, before I talk about the one thing that Sony did with this movie that absolutely categorically pisses me off to no end, I do want to talk about the credit scenes, right? There's the mid-credit scene with Null, and it's definitely in the vein of Thanos, the first tease of Thanos in the first Avengers film, right? It's same lighting, shot the same way, same framing, the voice, the other voice talking about the threat to the universe, and now that Venom's gone, nothing can stop me, that type of deal, right? And so it's this idea that Sony is teasing Null as this big bad for the rest of their universe. And okay, that's fine. I just need to know what Sony's structure for this is, because they really haven't had one. It's funny how when we talk about the structure of these shared cinematic universes, Fox Marvel had more of a structure than Sony does. I don't know what Sony's doing. I don't know. And I know that, there's a lot of the whole, okay, how nicely can they play with Marvel Studios with respect to Spider-Man and all that? What's the status of the Spider-Verse films? We still have another Sony Marvel film coming out later this year in Kraven the Hunter. So I don't know what direction Sony is taking their universe in. I'm willing to see what it is, but okay, I guess you're going to set up Null as a big bad. All right, whatever. We'll see how that goes. I'm not writing it off like so many fans are, oh, it's Sony, it's going to be terrible. I'm not even going to have any hopes for it. No, I'm going to remain open-minded because I've been open-minded for their entire franchise to this point. They haven't put out a movie so far that I have disliked. Again, I own Madam Web in 4K Steelbook. I'm going to own Morbius in 4K Steelbook. You're never going to get me to hate those movies. You're not. Because at this point in life, I don't feel like hating shit like that. I just don't. I don't feel like wasting my energy hating shit like that. I just don't feel like that anymore. And I can find silver linings, and having a wide strike zone really does help me. And if you want to consider that lowered standards, that's your business. You can be miserable and feel that way if you like. I don't think anybody that listens to my show to this point feels that way with respect to how I feel about it, but I'm just saying anybody that does listen, if you think it's a lowering of standards, well, that's your own pretentious fault. You can totally feel that way if you like. But these movies are made to please the general audience. And if Venom: The Last Dance continues to make money, then this most certainly would give Sony an impetus to continue whatever it is they're going to do with Null's storyline. And then that goes into what we saw at the very end credit scene, which is the bartender that Eddie talked to at the beginning, right? His universe's version that, was taken captive by the general, Chiwetel Ejiofor's character, and we didn't see him for the entire rest of the movie. Apparently he survived the big detonation of Area 51, and he's alive. And on top of that, so is a symbiote in one of the vials. Now the question is, okay, was this the vial that Teddy had with the electrical symbiote that powered her towards the very end of the film? Or is this a suggestion that Venom could come back? Because there is a piece of Venom symbiote that was at the bar that was also taken in possession. It's very loosely, as far as I'm concerned, it's very loosely giving us a way to bring Venom back. It's going to largely depend on the success of this film and what Sony wants to do going forward. But yeah, we could totally see Venom come back. And whether it's going to be Eddie Brock or anybody else, No idea. But they're just leaving the door open. That's all it is. They're leaving the door open, and it's not a massive thing. I mean, listen, when it comes to like mid and end credit scenes, these are some better ones than we've seen, right? They're better than the Morbius ones, that were disjointed and didn't make any sense in that regard. And I don't remember if there were any in Madam Web or not, to be honest with you, but they're just leaving it open to bring Venom back, because, I mean, clearly, I don't know what Hardy's stance is on it, but clearly he's enjoyed playing the character and he's given his all for it, right? And, he's such a storied character in lore. There's a ton of other things they can do with him and the symbiotes, especially if they do plan to do stuff with this Null character, right? So, yeah, that's all it was. So just leaving it open for the possibility of Venom to come back and for them to flesh out whatever they're going to do with Null going forward as far as their big bad. And again, I'm not going to write it off until I see exactly what their plan is, should they have one. We'll see. Do I have my doubts about Avi Arad? Sure I do. And Amy Pascal? Yeah, sure I do. But I just don't feel like being, malignant about it. I don't feel like being, shaking my fist at a cloud about it. I don't feel that way about it. We'll see where it goes. We'll see how entertaining it is going forward. Okay. Now, here's the one thing that Sony did with this movie that absolutely 1000% categorically pisses me off to no end. And as of right now, me recording this episode, I am still very much enraged by it, if you will. And I'm pretty sure that I'm on an island with this one, unless one of you is like, oh man, me too. And then we will have like a bonding moment in that regard. But this is not something that I've really talked about before with respect to comic book movies. But of course, when you get to credit sequences in comic book movies, obviously they play the score and maybe some needle drops, maybe some original tunes that were made for the film in that regard, right? And they played more than a few in this regard. Like there was if I look at the soundtrack here, there was obviously the rendition of Space Oddity from David Bowie that they had. There's another song called I Had Some Help by Louis Bell, Ashley Gorley, Jonathan Joseph Hoskins, Austin Post, Ernest Keith Smith, Ryan Voss, tons of people, performed by Post Malone featuring Morgan Wallen. So that was in there. There's another song called Two-Face, written by Ian O'Neill Smith and Arno Sugarman and a number of others, performed by Ian, right? So all of that, Shazam identified all of that. And then there's this hip-hop tune at the very end of the movie, and it's called Null and Void. And it was written by Seamus Ryan. I think he's the one that goes by the name Esoteric, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Written by Seamus Ryan, Frankie Pulitzer, Clifford Smith, and George Andronopoulos. Produced by 7L and Agent X. Performed by a group called Czarface, which I'd never heard of until now. Frankie Pulitzer, who a lot of people are saying is Tom Hardy. A lot of people are saying Frankie Pulitzer is Tom Hardy's rap name. And Method Man. And this tune is badass. It's really awesome. But guess what? I didn't know any of what I just told you the moment that I'm in the theater, right? And I went to go see this at Imagine, right? I saw this at the Palladium, the same theater, that I've seen a bunch of movies in. I saw Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I saw Deadpool and Wolverine there. It's the same exact theater that 3 years ago they did the BVS Comes Home event for that I've talked about, right? So I'm in this theater, and I'm ready to go to the bathroom because I had like a big, I did, concessions, right? I said, screw it. Like a lot of times when I go see a movie after work, sometimes I get concessions to help me stay awake. And it doesn't always work because I've worked a long day, and sometimes I'll zone in and out for a period of time, not a long period of time. But at any rate, yeah, I did get some nachos, and I did get a big cherry vanilla Coke, right? So yes, at this point, end of the movie, credits are rolling, but I'm waiting for the end credit scene that I'm pretty sure is there, that I've been told was there, right? And then this badass hip-hop song comes on, and I hear Method Man. I know he's in it, right? But I don't know the other guys. I don't know Czarface. I don't know Frankie Pulitzer. But I hear this song, and of course, my first thought as I'm, holding my bladder, standing on the steps, ready to leave the theater, is let me pull out my phone and Shazam this thing and figure out exactly who this is. And 3 times, and Shazam every time was like, sorry, can't identify it. And I'm like, what the flip is this? How dare you put a song in these end credits that Shazam can't identify, that I can't listen to? The only reason I was able to read you exactly what that song is, again, Null and Void, performed by Czarface, Frankie Pulitzer, and Method Man, is because I went on the internet later And Reddit is all over this. I found at least 3 different Reddit posts where people were freaking out the same way I was, like, hey, what the hell was that song at the end of the credits? Shazam can't identify it, and we really want to hear it. And so one person actually recorded 25 seconds of it and posted it to Reddit. Another person took a screenshot of the credits and identified what the song was, right? This isn't available. It's a song that is not available. I can't listen to it. I can't go to Apple Music. I can't go to Spotify. I can't even find it on YouTube. It's unreleased music. Screw you, Sony. Absolutely screw you. And I am really censoring my language on that. I would love to bleep myself out on this because it really, really pisses me off when I hear a badass hip hop tune. And frankly, they've been doing this with the Venom, like the first Venom movie that they had. The Eminem did the Venom song, and then Run the Jewels, Killer Mike and LP. They did a song called Let's Go the Royal We for the movie, and that was really awesome because I do love Run the Jewels personally. That they are one of my favorite hip hop groups. And so there was that. And then Little Sims, who was in the club scene in Venom Let There Be Carnage, she had a song that she had done beforehand, like before the Venom movies, called Venom, that they put at the end credits of that movie that I really liked. But I was able to find all of those. I was able to Shazam them and find them on Apple Music right after I saw the damn movie. This one I couldn't. I wanted to drive out of the damn parking garage listening to this badass song from the movie that I just watched, and I couldn't because it's unreleased. Don't do that. Don't flippin' do that, Sony. That's really infuriating. I hate that. And to this day, I'm recording this on a Sunday night. It's still not available. I'm looking, and again, I'm not the only one that is like looking for this damn song. It's an unreleased Sarface tune, and they'll release it at some point. I get that. This is me being impatient. But the reason that I'm impatient is because I just saw the damn movie. I just heard it. I heard the damn song. I want to hear it again. I want to blast it through my speakers in my car, and I can't do it because it's not available. Don't do that. Don't frickin' do that. That drives me mad to no end because it's worse than an earworm, right? It's not like an earworm is like you hear something and you can't remember what it was and you keep trying to figure out what it was. No, I know what this is. I just can't listen to it. I can't listen to it, and I hate that. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. It drives me up a wall. Don't do that. Do not do that. You want to really piss me off? Do that. Like just give me a song, and like I said, the credits were rolling, and I missed what it was. But again, I go on Reddit, and there's a ton of people that are in the same position as me, so I don't feel alone. At least there are other people that are like, what the F was that song? Why can't we listen to it, right? Release it immediately. Yes, release it immediately. The movie just came out. Why wouldn't you release it when the movie releases? Why wouldn't it be available Friday? Why can't we listen to it after we've seen the damn movie? What are you waiting for? Is it because there are lyrics that could spoil the plot? I don't give a shit. I've seen the movie. Release the damn song. Ugh. You have no idea how much that drives me up a wall. It is the number one thing about this film that royally pisses me off. And I don't think I've ever complained about something like that before. I can't remember if there have been any other situations where it has happened, but this is one that this infuriates me the most out of any of those situations. I so wanted to, and I've had cases where I've seen movies and I've heard like a badass score or I've heard a badass song from it, and I'm like, okay, on the way home, I'm going to listen to this like on repeat because I really like this. And I did it for like Godzilla King of the Monsters, because I loved the score for that particular film. I did it for Mad Max and like some other, like I've done it for other like movies, and I wanted to do it here and I couldn't do it. And it's just very frustrating to be restricted like that. And yeah, that's the number one thing that they did that absolutely pisses me off. They put a piece of unreleased music in the end credits that I really like, and I can't listen to it. In fact, I have listened to the 25-second clip of it that somebody recorded with like garbled audio because clearly the phone was in their pocket or whatever, right, to hide it. I totally get that. I've listened to that clip on the Reddit post like repeatedly. Like, so I remember the beat for this. It's such a kick-ass killer beat, and like the lyrics, just it's awesome. It's really good. Yes, because I do enjoy hip-hop. I enjoy really good hip-hop, and that was really good. It's just as soon as they release it, I'm going to find it. and I'm going to hear it, but it's just, why wouldn't it be released now? Why can't we have it now? Ugh. Anyway, that was the one thing that royally pissed me off about the film. So, yeah, Sony, you can go straight to hell for doing that. I hate that. You know, I don't care what legalities or what other bullshit you hit it. Figure that shit out. Or otherwise, don't put it in the end credits, as far as I'm concerned. Especially since I was, again, holding my bladder because I really had to go to the bathroom just so that I could hear what the damn thing was. And for Shazam to deny me 3 times throughout the song played long enough I could try Shazam thrice in order to be able to get it. And 3 times it's like, sorry, no result, sorry, no result, sorry, no result. Ugh. All right. I think I've ranted about that enough. I think that'll do it for this episode of Flight Review. My thoughts on Venom: The Last Dance, the conclusion to the Venom trilogy, spoiler-filled, if you will. Thank you so much for listening to this show. Again, thank you so much for supporting theflightcast.com. If you're a patron at patreon.com/theflightcast, thank you so much for your patience and your support as well. If you have any thoughts with respect to Venom: The Last Dance, if you saw it and you want to share any thoughts, if you have any opinions on what I said with respect to, what I thought about the film, or what I think about, the general audience versus the fandom reaction to this film, or if you're somebody that is just as infuriated that we can't listen to Null and Void by Starface, Frankie Pulitzer, and Method Man, because they haven't released it yet, even though it was in the damn end credits of the movie, you know where to find me on Threads at The Flightcast, on Instagram at The Flightcast. There's also a Flightcast Facebook page, and of course I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there. If you live in the United States of America and you're listening to this show right now, don't forget to vote on November 5th. I'll go ahead and say that as well, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.